Hello, and thank you for joining us for the third episode of On the Mark, Financial Literacy with Mark Zinman. Hey, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Monica.
Good morning. Hey, Alicia.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. So today we have a two-part episode, right? We're going to start out by talking a little bit about Investing 101 for people just starting out, followed by some potential upcoming changes, tax changes to both individuals and businesses.
So before we get to that,
Yeah.
I want to tell you that Alicia is a real trooper. Okay, she's the one that has to do the engineering here, and she's the one that had to be editing the first two episodes, and I believe that she's already sick of me. Okay, she's more sick of me than my wife is. And two more things to talk about. So I'm not wearing headphones today because for the last week my wife's been saying to me, "When's your next haircut appointment?" And I did it today, so I figured I don't want to mess up this hair today.
Showing off the new hair.
Yeah, and then the other final thing is that, like, we're, in our studio here, and we have other people working, and we ask them all to be quiet. Meanwhile, God has a thunderstorm going on right now, so we may be interrupted with thunder in the background.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just don't like the topic we're talking about.
So let's start with Investing 101. Let's just start by discussing why is it important for a young adult to start investing?
It's important because I discussed in an earlier episode that there is a financial life cycle, and so a younger person, their first opportunity to invest would probably be in a retirement plan with their first employer. Mm-hmm. And so, I already have said that I don't like the word retirement, I like wealth builder. Mm-hmm. And the idea of building wealth is to attempt to either get the money when you get to retirement or have that financial reserve if you need it later in life but before retirement. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for people to start investing, start gaining the knowledge of investing, and as their finances allow them to maybe expand how and with whom they invest.
Yes, and that was episode 1. If anyone is watching and is not sure what Mark is referencing back to, please check out episode 1 again. So when should someone invest? So you're talking about a 401k, right? That's the first entry
401k,
into investment?
Yeah, it could be a 401k, it could be a simple IRA. They're similar. Most employers now offer some type of retirement. There may be a waiting period. You have to be an employee for a certain period of time. I am not saying that you shouldn't invest on your own, but just being realistic, a 20-some-year-old person who just got out of school, maybe with some school debt, getting the first apartment, maybe having to do something with their transportation, I think that investing is going to be down the list, and it should be, but it shouldn't be off the list. Like, I will probably say this, I said it in an earlier episode, I'll say it again, I'll say it in the next 25 episodes, or hopefully 100, is that people have to do what I call like cubby hole investing. Like, nobody has enough money for any one thing, so they're going to have to stuff a little in each one, and one of those little buckets is 401k. One of them could be, some kind of savings account. And we've talked about, so, you can talk about investing. Having some kind of a financial reserve is also investing, right? Like, I need to have some savings in case we've talked about what the number of months could be. 3 to 6 months of savings would be ideal. It's not always realistic, but it's a goal. So, I mean, the more you save, the more you prevent your downside risk.
And you talked about a simple IRA and a 401k, and you will maybe see some trends into what size employer might offer a simple over a 401k. Is that something that you want to educate a little bit?
Yeah, so they're very similar mechanically. So a simple IRA, from the employer point of view, has less administration and has less design variations. So the most common one is you elect to defer a certain amount of money, the employer has to match 3%. There's no customization. There's maybe a little customization on how long somebody has to wait to get in or stuff like that. But basically it's you defer what you want, the employer matches 3% of your gross. And from the employer point of view, they don't have to file a tax return. They don't have to have a third-party administrator. It's less administration. A 401k, from the employee's point of view, is kind of similar. You elect how much you want to defer out of your salary. There may be some variation on the employer side on what they match. There's a thing called a safe harbor. So what a safe harbor is that so what the IRS doesn't want people to do, they don't want the owners to put all this money away and the rank and file put nothing away. So they kind of like force the employers to incentivize the employees to put away and say, okay, well, if you want to put away, right now the maximum I think is like $31,000 if you're over the age of 50. And if you want to put away $31,000, then your employees have to put away a certain amount. And there's a test for that. If you don't want to test, you want to opt out, then you have to give them what's called a safe harbor 401k. And a safe harbor 401k would be either a 3% match or a 4% match. But 401ks are even more elaborate than that. They can have a profit sharing component to it. So don't get tripped up on the words. From an employee point of view, your pay stub will look the same. It might say simple instead of 401k, but what you're doing and how it's being done is the same exact way.
So if we're talking to young individuals and this is their first entry into investments, there might be some other things that you could provide an education on. Do we want to, if someone might hear the term the vesting schedule, do you want to talk about what that is?
Okay, so thanks, great question. So like I said, and this would be more in a 401k profit sharing, the vesting comes in the profit sharing part. So if an employer has a match, regardless of when you leave, you get what your deferral was plus the match. You just take it with you, okay? If they also have a profit sharing component where they say, okay, we're going to give you an extra $1,000 profit sharing, there's usually a vesting schedule. What's that mean? It means that in order to get the money, you have to be there a certain amount of time. And the most common vesting schedule is 6 years, right? It's 20% after 1 year, then 40, 60, 80, 100. So if you're there 6 years and after 6 years and you leave, you get your 401k, you get the match, and you get the profit sharing. If you leave before the 6 years, then you would get your 401, you would get your deferral, the match the employer, and a percentage of what you had put in for profit sharing based on how many years you were. And I get 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 is the most common schedule, step-up schedule, yeah.
That's very helpful.
And the other thing to note is, if you're changing jobs, this is really important. So one of the benefits that they have put in recent years, and there's been some thing, is that you can roll. So when you leave an employer, you have 3 options. You can leave it there, worst option in the world, okay? You can roll it to an IRA, or you can roll it to your new employer's plan. My preference is roll it to your new employer's plan. The worst is to leave it there, and the reason why leaving it there is bad is because one of two things can happen. In certain plans, if you don't have enough money, they have a portion of the plan saying, well, let's say your account's worth less than $5,000 and you don't take it, they'll refund it to you. If they refund it to you, you have to pay tax, a penalty on that money, just like you took a distribution and now you don't have the $5,000 anymore or whatever it is. The second reason is because people forget. Like my wife worked as a school teacher when we first got married, and she says to me like a week or two ago, she said, you think I still have a pension for the school district I worked in 30 years ago? I'm like, I don't know, call them. Like, so there's a person who doesn't, now I don't know if she doesn't remember or she didn't do anything about it 30 years ago, but now all of a sudden wondering if she has a account somewhere where she has money that she doesn't know about.
Yeah. I know something that you feel very passionately about, borrowing against your 401k.
There's two financial things I have a lot of passion on. One is credit card debt, which will probably come up in every single episode, okay? It is very evil. When you're paying 20 to 30%, it's very hard. Remember, think 30%. It's really hard to get, especially if you can't pay. Don't use a credit card unless you can pay it off in that month. I love credit cards. I use them. I get my points. I buy things, whatever you get with your points, I stay free at Hilton, whatever it is, but pay it off every month. And it has to be part of your budget. And then the thing about borrowing from a 401k, so it's a wealth builder, okay? So if we're trying to put it away for savings for a rainy day, for your retirement, for an emergency, and when I say an emergency, I'm talking about like a real emergency, like somebody sick, dying, I mean something, not that you want a new car or that you want to buy Christmas toys or something. It has to be an absolute last resort over even, I would have credit card debt before I would take money out of my 401k. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is that it's not really your money. It is your money, but it's not your money at this time. The second reason is a large percentage of 401k loans end up being distributions. And how that happens is that, let's say, for example, you're working for an employer who allows you to take out a loan. You take the loan out, and you're young and you're pregnant, and you decide to take, FMLA, and they're holding your job for you, whatever. But after a certain number of weeks, because they were taking the money out of your pay, or you leave the job, same thing, you forfeit. You now defaulted on your loan, which means that it becomes a distribution. The same way we talked about the $5,000 or less from an old 401k, and you just don't want it to happen. Keep in mind that kind of income's on top of your income. So when we talk about marginal tax bracket, it'll be at the highest rate that you're going to pay, and then plus 10%, which is the penalty. There are some exceptions about taking money out, but it's not a loan. It might be an in-service distribution, because there are some allowed where if you had a medical thing, permanent disability, there's a bunch of stuff that you could take it out. But just a general source of loan, I got this money, I might as well use it, please, no.
So let's say we have a young investor who's lucky enough to invest outside, in addition to their 401k. And we want to talk about time horizons, and how we want to, perhaps you could share some information that would enable investors to make a decision depending upon how long they plan to hold the investment and what their risk tolerance is.
So I always define risk as time, okay? So the longer you have before you ultimately need the money, the more risk you could take. And so that's the first thing I decided is I'm taking this money, and when will I need it? If the answer is, I don't know if I'll ever need it, I don't know if I need it in the next few years. I mean, basically 3 to 5 years is what I consider to be the edge of long term. Okay? I don't need it for 30 years, doesn't have to be the answer. It just has to be, So I'm really big on having some type of a reserve for savings, living on a budget, putting money in savings for things that may not be a recurring thing. Let's say your car insurance comes up every 6 months. Well, your car insurance might be $1,200 every 6 months. Well, then put $200 away every month for your car insurance so you can pay the $1,200. So these are everything's a different bucket, right? If you're going to start investing, for the most part, unless you have a fair amount of money, you're not going to, unless your parents have somebody and they will take you on because you're the child of a good investor, your options are going to be limited. You're going to be robo-investing or have to do some of your research on your own or whatever. And so I would recommend the Fidelities of the world, the Vanguards, where you can read in English the description of what the investment is and make choices. And also understand something, there's a difference between investing $1,000 and $100,000. Okay.
And the difference between investing in mutual funds versus individual stocks?
I would tell you, unless you are a professional investor or have it professionally managed, you always want to be in mutual funds.
Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is?
And the reason for that is because you're spreading your risk out. Mm-hmm. You're going to pick a portfolio that is based upon what you think your risk is. Mm-hmm. And most mutual funds come into different things: large cap, mid cap, mm-hmm. Small cap, technology, banking. There's so many different descriptions that you can, and they're professionally managed within those portfolios. Buying individual stocks when you're younger, like buying Robinhood or AMC, that's gambling. And you can do that, it's fine, but that's not saving, it's gambling. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe, you buy crypto and it goes up 10 times, and maybe you buy crypto and it goes down to nothing. Maybe you buy AMC and it goes up to 30 or it goes to 0. You just don't know.
It goes up and it goes back down again.
Or you write it, or you don't, or it's up high and you get to be piggish, and then you wait till, and then it ends up going down, So
that kind of ties into the next question that I wanted to pose you that some people may find helpful. When you talk about diversification of your portfolio, what do you mean by that?
Oh, you don't want to, eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. Term everybody's heard, right? You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So mutual funds, you own a little tiny piece of a lot of different stocks. And the only thing you have to be careful as you invest and you put together a portfolio is you don't want to, like a large cap and a technology and a mid cap, they all can be some of the same stocks, depending on the thing. And you just don't want to necessarily have every single mutual fund you have the same stocks, because now you have your risk, mm-hmm. right? In the small amounts, it's not a big deal. I mean, I don't want to minimize anybody's investing, but if you only have $10,000, you only have $10,000 risk. If you have $100,000, $100,000 risk. And so the more you're investing and that's growing, the more your risk tolerance and diversity may change, and your use of that money may change. We're saving for a house, we're saving for retirement, we're saving for college. I mean, they just change in different buckets and different risk tolerances.
Before we move on to the second part of our podcast today, is there anything else that you might want to talk about Investing 101 for?
I think it's important to do some research and some reading. And I think that I know that they're selling the Vanguards and the Fidelities, but they have a lot of resources on there for younger people or maybe people who may not have had experience before. There is somebody you can talk to. It will be a general person, but you can certainly ask questions. But, try it. I mean, the idea is like you're just dipping your toe in the water and you're just going to put the money away and I had this joke. So we've talked in prior episodes about recessions, and so I had this joke. And so during the Great Recession, the market went down by half. And so I was joking with somebody that I never bought a stock more than $2 a share, and they said, "Why?" I said, "Because it only can go down $2 a share, right?" So it's sort of the same kind of idea. Don't worry about it. The market. So when we talk about risk, the market. The risk is time. We've been in a very volatile market the last couple of months, and depending on what day you needed the money, you could have been really, or you could have had a good day. And so, but now as it starts to stretch out, you can start to see that it's evening out a little bit. And so let's take that 6 months and make it 3 years, and what's it going to look like?
All right, so let's segue now to have a little chit chat about tax policy, and I think you also have a little funny story to share on that.
Well, I'm going to talk about tax policy. The reason why I think tax policy is important for this episode is that Congress is considering like the great, whatever I think they're calling it the Great Plan or whatever, which is the budget for next year. They're targeting around Memorial Day to have something passed, if at all. And so because it's in the news constantly, I think that there's a timeliness to have this like general discussion with the audience. But the funny story is that my daughter Rachel, who's when she got her job, she was extremely upset that she had to pay taxes. She's like 13 or 14 years old, and she said, "That's unconstitutional. It's taxation without representation." And she still says the same thing today. Like, if you can't vote, then you shouldn't have to pay taxes. So that's not the rule, by the way. But my daughter is very principled, and she has the same principles years later. But generally, I want to take a little history on income tax. So income tax has been around since like around World War I, 1919, around that time. And for most of our tax policy, and it's changed over all these different years and whatever. And depending on how old you are, you'll remember, this change or that change or income averaging. I mean, there's all kinds of things that people like my age and older still mention that aren't around anymore. But it had a social component. And what was that social component? The social component was you got some benefit by being married. You got some benefit by having a child. A deduction, a credit. You got a deduction for buying a house. You got to take your mortgage interest off. There's all kinds of things that were within that. Even now, buy an energy efficient heater, you'll get $500. Buy an energy efficient window. Those are social. $7,500 for an electric car. They're all socially weighted. So I want to talk about that our current President Trump passed in his first term. It was called I don't know the exact name of the act, but it was 2018 tax law. That's what we call it here. Okay, and it was put in, and it expires at the end of December. And why does it expire? Because every time there's a piece of legislation, the Office of Management and Budget puts a number on it of how much it's going to put in funds or how much it's going to cost. And so to limit the cost to the government, it had the sunset provision. I think it was 7 years, so it's 2025. So now they're talking about it, and obviously when you have a president who had, this was his maybe signature tax bill, he's going to want to have the same one again, right? Because he wants to have it. And let's talk about like what the law did. So anyone here who's listening, who's maybe under 30, because we're talking about 7 years now, have never lived under a tax law other than this. So they don't, when I say alternative minimum tax and standard deductions and exemptions, they're like, what the heck, Mark's talking French now, but that was part of it. And, a lot of times what's said in the media, Democrat, Republican, Independent, is just sound bites that sound good. It's amazing how many times the middle class is going to benefit, but the middle class never thinks they benefited, right? So everybody wants to benefit the middle class, but do they actually benefit? And a lot of the changes to the 2018 tax law, and I've told clients this over the years, was smoke and mirrors. It's like a different way to get to the same number. Did people actually save some money? Yeah, but they gave up, but it depended on their circumstances. I mean, for example, there's a limit on how much you can deduct in state and local taxes of $10,000. Why did that come about? It came about because they used to have this tax called an alternative minimum tax, which was put in the 1960s, and it was targeted against the 4 richest families in the United States, like the Rockefellers, okay? And it was because back then the tax rate was 70%, and they wanted to make sure they didn't get away without paying taxes. So they put it in. But what happened is from 1970 to 2018, we had a lot of inflation. And so people who made $100,000 in 1967 were rich, and people who made $100,000 in 2018 were middle class. And so the law didn't change. So there was some fixes prior to 2018 where they indexed it to inflation, whatever. But basically, that was probably the worst thing in the tax law, because go explain that to someone. Your taxes are this, but because you had so many deductions, we're going to add this to it, and it comes back to this number. So the $10,000 limit was, we'll limit to $10,000, and then we won't have the alternative minimum tax. But it also was a punishment. And who was it a punishment to? Democratic states. It was a to the Democratic states, because New Jersey, New York, the states that you think have high either income taxes or high real estate tax. Nevada doesn't have an income tax, so $10,000 Florida doesn't have an income tax, so $10,000 of state and local taxes is hard to get to. People in New Jersey might pay $15,000 or $18,000 in real estate taxes before they have a job, and so they're well over $10,000 without ever getting anywhere. So yeah, it was a penalty to them. The thing you have to think about, and this gets to be a little bit, there's only so much money. Okay, there's only so much money, and so when we're talking about this new tax law, there is a $4.5 trillion price tag that has been noted in the news for extending this tax rate. And the other part of it is that this tax thing violates, and it has been this way, and it probably even started under Democratic things. We're getting away from social taxation. Like, we're getting away from giving benefits to Americans for doing what society thinks is good. And what does that mean? Well, under the tax law we have now, there's a limit of you cannot deduct mortgage interest on more than $750,000. Well, there are a lot of middle-class people that might have houses that cost more than especially if we live in a more affluent, New York area.
The area that we're in.
Yeah, Northeast, Southwest, California, all those Democratic states. Anyway, you can get a mortgage for less than $700,000 in Montana, I think. But $700,000 is a very limiting thing. And why is that limiting? Because do you really get any benefit? So let's just take, under our current tax law, a married filing joint person gets $28,000, I think they're $29,200 or $28,800. That's indexed to inflation. So how do you get to that number? Well, you get $10,000 of taxes. So you get the greater of your standard deduction, this $29,000, or your itemized deductions. Now, if you are stopped at $10,000 for taxes, that means you need $19,000 of either interest or contributions. That's the only other two things that go into itemized deductions. And we're seeing more people being able to itemize now because interest rates went from 3 to 7. But for the most part, people were paying $10,000 a year in interest. So that's 10 of taxes, 10 of interest, and maybe a couple $1,000s to the church. That's 22, but you get 29. So why buy a house? That's why you're seeing all these rental properties going up, because there's not any real benefit to buying a home. And I think that affects, obviously, the middle class much worse than the wealthy, because the wealthy don't need a mortgage.
Okay. So this might be a good time to share a question.
Okay,
We have a question
go
from
for
a
it.
viewer. Susie is her name, and she is in Ambler, Pennsylvania. And she asks, does this estate exemption unfairly benefit the wealthy?
Okay, so the I'm gonna back up a little bit and go through it. So the two parts, so I already stated that the tax law of 2018 did benefit middle class in some ways. I ran a bunch of scenarios before our podcast today to see, like, if you had this, what would your tax be in 18 versus 25? So it did benefit, but who did it benefit more? It actually did benefit people who make more than $500,000. Why? Because our maximum tax rate before 2018 was 39.6%. Now it's 37. So those people who make more than $500,000 are saving 2.6%. And then the other part, which goes to Susie's question, is I remember back in the 90s, $600,000 was the so there's inheritance tax. So when somebody dies, basically whoever the executor is, family member or third party, they have to take an inventory. I have a house worth this, I have this. They add everything together, and based upon that value, you may be subject to federal or state. The states are usually not that high. Like we're here in Pennsylvania where we broadcast, it's 4 or 6%, 4.5 or 6%, not horrible. But federal inheritance tax is up to 50%. And so where does it benefit? So right now the current limit is $13.2 million per person. So if you're married, you will not pay any federal inheritance tax unless you have more than $26.4 million of value. That's real estate, retirement, everything. Where 20 years ago, that number was less than $1 million. So, thinking about my client base, and I'm an accountant, I have an accounting firm. People who come to me are probably more affluent because they have more complicated taxes and they need a CPA to do it. I can think of 2 people out of maybe 1,000 that we have that I can think of in this firm that have more than $26.2 million of thing. And so, yeah, that is a real benefit to a wealthy, and that's in that law. So while the middle class did benefit, I don't know how much, because there's another part to this. Tax law, going back to probably 20 years ago, has been indexed to inflation. So when I run those scenarios of what your tax would have been in 2018 at the same income, it doesn't take into account the inflation changes. It's just like saying, well, it would have been, if you made $300,000 in 2018, you would have paid $70,000 in taxes, and in 2025 it would be $65,000 with taxes. But is inflation more than the $5,000? And the reason I'm saying this is you should just be informed when you hear this stuff, when you're wherever you get news from. Just understand that most times there's 2 sides to everything, and it doesn't mean that what's being presented is incorrect. It just means what's being presented isn't the only choice. It's the same thing I'm going to say in almost every episode we do here, right? You need to understand, when you make a financial decision, using a credit card, not paying it off, taking money out of your 401k, all the stuff we talked about, okay? It's a decision. And if you make that decision, well, what's the cost of making that decision? I have to pay interest of 20%. I may forfeit my 401k loan. I mean, we said don't do it, but at least, we can't stop people from doing it. So if we have this tax law passed, is there going to be enough money to give people no tax on tips? Is there going to be money to give no tax on overtime? I think if I'm speaking to who I hope my audience is, how many of you have people in childcare? That hasn't been increased in many years, and I get nauseous when I see parents come in and it's $35,000 and $40,000 for 2 kids to go to childcare. Meanwhile, the credit's 5 and hasn't changed in many, many years. So there are a lot of things that we could use that $4.5 trillion to benefit more people with.
Okay. And as you talk about that and having choices and future episodes, I don't know if you want to touch on briefly now, although we are scheduled to have a deeper dive in the future on different ways that you can leave your wealth and your assets to the next generation.
Well, I'll just go high level. Everyone should have okay. So either have a will or you don't have a will. If you have a will, it directs some assets. So what are the common assets that people have? A retirement plan, they might have life insurance, they might have a house, they might have bank accounts, okay? And they may have children.
And let's just, I don't mean to interrupt you, but if we just pause for a moment, whoever, being the executor or executrix of the will, it's a task, right? It's a heavy administrative burden. It is a responsibility. And also for anyone that might be listening that perhaps they're leaving wealth and assets to their children. It's important for their children or whoever those beneficiaries may be to understand that landscape, to understand what the different variables are, where there have been investments, and how do you, at some point, and perhaps it's now, could I ask you, what administrative procedures do you recommend that adults follow so that if they should pass, their children know what assets they have, where, how to access them?
Well, first of all, you should tell the person who is your executor that they're the executor. It shouldn't be a surprise.
Not necessarily the beneficiary, of course, right? These can be two different.
A lot of times, the most common you see, unless it's a really big, is one of the children, maybe the oldest, the one that has a financial background. I mean, it could be any parental reason is the executor. Most of the children, as long as the family's not having conflict, know what pretty much mom and dad's wishes might be. And remember, usually in most cases, beneficiary is the spouse, so it's the second to die who really triggers this event. You want to make sure they know what their wishes were. So let's talk real generally. You have a will. So I was starting to say, like, so things that have a beneficiary name, retirement plans, insurance, annuities. They do not go, wills don't matter. When you list out, I'm going to give money to Monica, then Monica gets the money regardless of what your will says. The will controls other stuff, okay? If you have a certain piece of jewelry you want to give Monica, you should write, it's called a codicil, you should write a little letter that gets attached to your will that says, I want Monica to have this piece of jewelry, I want Alicia to have this piece of jewelry, so that, your children don't fight over who gets mom's china collection, right? The most important thing, and again, I don't want to get too deep in this if we're going to have a whole episode on this, is the most important class of people that need a will are people with children. And the answer is why? Why? Because the most important thing is deciding who the guardian of those children are, and that's what the will does. So I know that my wife, every time, my wife and I are going on a vacation in November, and she's already telling me that we haven't updated our will in 6 or 7 years, and it seems that family trips tend to trigger will
revision.
Yeah, or research, or who we leaving what to, and yeah.
And we always have to be mindful, and I've experienced this myself. I have 2 children, and as they become age of majority, when they're minors, and you have a guardian, and then as they age out, you will change all of these things. And even if you have a child who is a young adult but might not have a lot of financial experience, even if they are over 18, they are over 21, you might, someone else may be the executor or executrix of the will to help them make those decisions.
You also could be setting up trust.
That's where we'll talk about a little bit about what is the probate process and when does that come into play, and talk about estate.
I don't want to get into the weeds, but a lot. What do I see trust for? Trusts are to help people that may not be financially able to handle the money, like a minor child or your irresponsible child, okay? It also, I see it a lot, to keep the money away from a spouse. I don't want, my son's married, my daughter's married, I don't want the significant other to get my money if they get divorced. I only want it to go to my child. And so you see a lot of this stuff. And listen, estate attorneys are great, and they'll help you walk through this. A lot of accountants have good knowledge. It's something I talk to my clients about. Part of hiring an accountant and a tax preparer is hiring someone to whom you can ask all these financial literacy questions. It's the whole reason for our podcast, okay? Like, I need a will. What do I do about savings? What do I do about my kid's 529? What do I do about retirement plans? We handle that with individuals. We handle that on the other side with people who own businesses. So it's a lot of it's very similar, and people need the opportunity to go to these places. And listen, like, you and I, Monica, we're sort of setting the agendas here of what our episodes are going to be, but I'm really hoping that how this podcast is going to evolve is the questions that come from our audience, like Susie, who are going to tell us something that what people want to hear rather than what we think they want to hear.
Right. So to that end, we are scheduled for our next podcast episode to be about wills, estates, trusts. And so we certainly encourage anyone watching today's episode to log onto our website at onthemark.cpa and submit your question on that or any other topic that you would like to discuss. We've provided some teaser topics during the end of this episode today, but we will want to do a deeper dive in the next episode.
I also want to know, like, people can vote. Headphones, no headphones. Okay? All right, so I can decide for the next one. I mean, if I'm having a bad hair day, should it be headphones or should it just be like no headphones or headphones all the time because, my ears are kind of not that pretty. Okay?
And we want to thank Zimmerman & Company for sponsoring today's episode of On the Mark Financial Literacy with Mark Zinman. And we want to thank everyone for watching us today. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. All content provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only. No representations are made as to the accuracy or completeness of information that is presented. On the Mark, its owners, collaborators, and guests will not be liable for any errors or omissions, nor for any losses, injuries, or damages from the use of this information.